At 11:10, on the morning of June 4th, 1944, Radioman Third Class Wayne Pickels pressed his headphones tight against his ears aboard USS Chatelain and listened to the faint echo returning from 800 yards ahead. The destroyer Escort rolled gently in the Atlantic swells 150 miles west of Cape Blanco, French West Africa. Pickels had been tracking this contact for 90 seconds. The signature was unmistakable: submarine, range closing. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Through the sonar equipment, he could hear the mechanical hum of diesel engines and the distinct rhythm of propellers turning underwater. WWII, the fourth German submarine they had hunted in 3 weeks. This one was different. This one they were going to capture. Nobody on Task Group 22.3 knew they were about to make history. Nobody knew that in the next 7 hours they would accomplish what no American naval force had achieved since the War of 1812. They would board an enemy warship on the high seas and take her as a prize. The concept seemed impossible. German U-boats were equipped with demolition charges specifically designed to prevent capture. The standing order from Admiral Karl Dönitz was clear: if forced to surface, scuttle the boat immediately. No submarine commander in the German Navy wanted to be the man who let his boat fall into enemy hands intact. But Captain Daniel Vincent Gallery had been planning for this moment for weeks. He had trained boarding parties. He had drilled his crews on procedures nobody had attempted in over a century. He had studied every report of surfaced U-boats from the previous 3 years. He believed capture was possible if everything went perfectly. If the attack damaged the submarine enough to force her up, but not enough to sink her immediately. If the boarding party could reach the boat before she went down. If the German crew panicked and abandoned ship before completing scuttling procedures. If dozens of other variables aligned exactly right. The odds were terrible. The risks were enormous. If the Germans discovered a U-boat had been captured, they would immediately change all their codes and ciphers. The intelligence advantage Allied codebreakers had maintained since 1940 would vanish overnight. The invasion of Normandy was scheduled for June 6th, just 2 days away. If the Germans changed their codes now, Allied forces might lose the ability to read German communications at the most critical moment of the war. Gallery knew none of this. He was not cleared to know that British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had been reading German Enigma messages for 4 years. He was not cleared to know that American intelligence was tracking U-boat movements with unprecedented accuracy. He was not cleared to know that his success might compromise the most valuable intelligence operation of the entire war. He simply wanted to capture a U-boat because no American force had captured an enemy vessel at sea in 129 years, and he thought it could be done. At 11:10 on June the 4th, he was about to find out if he was right. The war in the Atlantic in 1944 was very different from the war in 1940 and 1941. In the early years, German U-boats operated with near impunity. Admiral Dönitz had deployed his submarines in coordinated wolfpack attacks against Allied convoys. The results had been catastrophic for the Allies. In 1942 alone, German U-boats sank over 6 million tons of Allied shipping. Over 1,300 ships went to the bottom. The Atlantic became known as the hunting ground. U-boat commanders achieved celebrity status in Germany. Photographs of successful captains appeared in newspapers. Radio broadcasts celebrated their victories. Young German men competed for positions in the U-boat service. But by 1944, the advantage had shifted decisively to the Allies. Several technological developments had transformed anti-submarine warfare. Long-range patrol aircraft now covered areas of the Atlantic that had previously been beyond aircraft range. Escort carriers brought air power directly to convoy routes. Improved radar allowed Allied ships and aircraft to detect surfaced submarines at night. Better depth charges could be dropped in more accurate patterns. Hedgehog forward-throwing weapons allowed attacking ships to maintain sonar contact during attacks. Most importantly, Allied intelligence could read German naval codes. Ultra-intercepts revealed U-boat positions, patrol areas, and refueling rendezvous. Allied forces could route convoys around known U-boat concentrations. They could position hunter-killer groups to intercept submarines before they reached convoy routes. The statistics proved the shift. In 1942, German U-boats sank 6.1 million tons of Allied shipping while losing 87 submarines. In 1943, they sank 2.6 million tons while losing 244 submarines. In the first 5 months of 1944, they sank 0.4 million tons while losing 96 submarines. The U-boat force was being systematically destroyed. Dönitz kept sending boats to sea because he believed Tinitangdan Allied anti-submarine resources was strategically valuable, even if his submarines achieved few sinkings. But the human cost was staggering. Of the 39,000 men who served in German U-boats during World War II, 30,000 died, a 76% casualty rate. No other military service in any nation during the war suffered losses approaching that magnitude. By June 1944, serving on a U-boat was effectively a death sentence. Young German sailors reported to submarine school knowing they would probably not survive the war. They went anyway, because orders were orders, and because the propaganda machine still portrayed U-boat service as heroic. But the reality was grim. Patrols that once lasted weeks now lasted days before Allied forces detected and destroyed the submarines. Boats that surfaced to recharge batteries were attacked within hours. The Bay of Biscay, the route from French bases to the Atlantic, had become known among German submariners as Death Valley. U-boats left port at night with minimal ceremony. No bands played. No crowds cheered. The boats slipped out quietly and often never returned. Those that did return told stories of constant attacks, near misses, damaged equipment, and shattered nerves. The psychological toll was immense. U-boat crews lived for weeks in cramped metal tubes that smelled of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and mildew. They endured depth charge attacks that could last hours. The explosions would shake the hull, lights would flicker, equipment would fail, leaks would spring. Men would pray and wait and hope the next explosion would not be the one that cracked the pressure hull and let the Atlantic pour in. Some men broke under the stress, some refused to go back to sea. Some, like Kapitänleutnant Peter Scheck, chose death over continued terror. U-505 had been one of the unluckiest boats in the German Navy. She was a Type Einzig submarine, 252 feet long, displacing 1,120 tons, surfaced. Built at Deutsche Werft in Hamburg, she was launched on May 24, 1941, and commissioned on August 26th, with Kapitänleutnant Axel Olaf Lowe in command. Lowe was experienced and competent. His first patrol took U-505 around the British Isles to Lorient in occupied France. The patrol was uneventful. No engagements, no attacks, but it established U-505's operational base for the rest of her career. Lowe's second patrol in February and March 1942 was far more successful. U-505 operated off the west coast of Africa and sank 4 merchant ships, totaling 16,000 tons. This was the kind of success German U-boat command expected. Lowe's third patrol from June to August 1942 took U-505 to the Caribbean. She sank 3 more ships, including the Colombian sailing vessel Resolute. That sinking had unexpected political consequences. Resolute belonged to a Colombian diplomat. Colombia declared war on Germany as a result. Not that Berlin was particularly concerned about Colombia entering the war, but the incident demonstrated how even small actions could have diplomatic repercussions. Lowe's health began failing during the third patrol. By September 1942, he was suffering from what was diagnosed as appendicitis. He was relieved of command and never returned to sea. His replacement was Kapitänleutnant Peter Scheck, a veteran officer who had served as executive officer on U-124 under the highly successful commander Jochen Mohr. U-124 had sunk 53 ships. Czech arrived with 2 Iron Crosses and high expectations. U-boat command believed he would bring similar success to U-505. Instead, Czech's tenure became a nightmare. His first patrol in October and November 1942 began well. U-505 sank the British freighter Ocean Justice off Venezuela. But on November the 10th, while surfaced near Trinidad, U-505 was surprised by a Royal Air Force Lockheed Hudson maritime patrol aircraft. The Hudson came in low and dropped a 250-pound bomb directly onto the submarine's foredice. The explosion killed 1 watch officer, wounded another, tore the anti-aircraft gun off its mounting, and severely damaged the pressure hull. Water flooded into the engine room through multiple breaches. Czech ordered the crew to abandon ship. The boat was clearly doomed, but Chief Petty Officer Otto Fricker and the technical staff refused to give up. They insisted they could save her. For 2 weeks, the crew worked around the clock making emergency repairs at sea. They welded patches over hull breaches. They rigged emergency pumps. They transferred wounded personnel to supply submarine U-462. Slowly, painfully, they stabilized the damage enough to limp back to Lorient. The transit took weeks at reduced speed. U-505 arrived on December the 12th, 1942. She had earned the distinction of being the most heavily damaged U-boat to successfully return to port during the entire war. The repairs took 6 months. U-505 remained in Lorient until July 1943. When she finally sailed on her 5th patrol, the mission lasted only 13 days. 3 British destroyers detected U-505 and pursued her for over 30 hours. The submarine escaped without significant damage, but had to return to France for repairs to systems stressed by prolonged evasive maneuvering. The 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th patrols were all aborted within days of departure. The submarine suffered repeated mechanical failures. Electrical equipment malfunctioned, radar systems failed. A diesel fuel tank developed a leak from a deliberately drilled hole. Welds on repaired parts cracked. U-505's crew began to suspect sabotage. They were correct. French dock workers in Lorient, many working for the resistance, were deliberately damaging German U-boats during repairs. The sabotage was subtle enough to pass inspection, but severe enough to cause failures at sea. U-505 became the butt of jokes throughout the base. Someone painted a sign near her mooring that read, U-505's hunting ground, mocking her inability to reach actual hunting grounds. The crew's morale collapsed. They had survived the worst damage any U-boat had endured. They had limped home when abandoning ship seemed the only option, and now they could not complete a single patrol without mechanical failure forcing them back to port. Captain Scheck grew increasingly frustrated and bitter. His command, which should have been a path to glory and promotion, had become a source of embarrassment. Other U-boat commanders made jokes about him. His crew sensed his deteriorating mental state and grew anxious. On October the 10th, 1943, U-505 finally managed to depart Lorient without immediate mechanical failure. The patrol seemed to be going well. The boat crossed the Bay of Biscay and reached the Atlantic without incident. Then, on October the 24th, 14 days into the patrol, British destroyers detected U-505 off the Azores. The submarine crash-dived. The destroyers attacked with depth charges. For hours, U-505 endured the explosions. The charges detonated close enough to shake the hull violently. Paint flaked off the interior bulkheads. Equipment rattled. Gauges fluctuated. Leaks appeared. The air grew foul as the crew's breathing consumed the oxygen. Carbon dioxide levels rose. Men's vision blurred. Some vomited from the fumes and the stress. Captain Scheck stood in the control room, watching his crew struggle. He had led them through months of mechanical failures, aborted patrols and jokes from other U-boat commanders. Now he was leading them through another depth charge attack that might kill them all. Something in his mind broke. Without warning, without any indication of what he intended, Scheck pulled out his Walther PPK pistol, raised it to his temple and fired. He collapsed on the control room deck in front of his horrified crew. Blood pooled on the metal floor. The depth charges continued exploding outside. First Watch Officer Oberleutnant zur See Paul Meyer stood frozen for perhaps 3 seconds. Then, training and duty took over. He assumed command. He continued evasive maneuvers. He waited for the attack to end. When the British destroyers finally lost contact and moved away, Meyer surfaced U-505 and headed back to Lorient. The crew buried Scheck at sea before dawn. They arrived at port on November the 7th, 1943. The entire patrol had lasted 30 days with 0 sinkings and 1 dead captain. Scheck became the only submarine commanding officer in any navy during World War II to commit suicide while underwater during combat operations. The psychological impact on U-505's crew was devastating. Many officers recommended that U-boat command disband the crew and reassign the men to other boats. The crew themselves requested transfer. They wanted nothing more to do with U-505. But Admiral Dönitz refused. He feared that if word spread about Scheck's suicide, morale throughout the U-boat force would collapse. Instead, he personally selected a new commander. Oberleutnant zur See Harold Lange was 40 years old, older than most U-boat commanders. He was a reserve officer, not a career naval officer. He had served as First Watch Officer on U-180 and briefly commanded that boat before being assigned to U-505. Lange had no sinkings to his credit. This was not unusual in late 1943, when success was measured by how long a commander kept his crew alive rather than how much tonnage he sank. But some officers questioned whether Lange had the temperament and skill to restore U-505's shattered morale. Lange's first patrol began on December the 25th, 1943. U-505 was part of Wolfpack Helle. The patrol lasted only 9 days. On December the 28th, German torpedo boat T-25 was sunk by British forces. U-505 rescued 33 survivors and returned to Lorient on January 2nd, 1944. Another aborted patrol. Another failed mission. Lange's crew remained intact and some morale improved simply because Lange was steady and professional. He did not have Scheck's volatile temperament. He listened to his officers. He maintained good relations with the crew. But the fundamental problem remained. U-505 was cursed. On March 16th, 1944, Lange took U-505 to sea for what would be her 12th and final patrol. The mission was straightforward. Patrol the West African coast, look for Allied shipping, report any fleet movements, attack targets of opportunity, standard U-boat operations for 1944, which meant limited expectations of success and high expectations of simply surviving. U-505 crossed the Bay of Biscay without incident and reached her patrol area off the Gold Coast. For weeks, nothing happened. No Allied ships appeared, no convoys materialized. U-505 cruised back and forth, seeing nothing but empty ocean. What Lange did not know was that Allied intelligence was reading German naval codes. Ultra-intercepts had revealed U-505's position and patrol area. Allied shipping was being routed around her. The submarine was isolated in an empty ocean, hunting prey that had been warned away. By late May, U-505 had been at sea for over 70 days without a single sighting. Fuel was running low. Provisions were diminishing. It was time to head home. On June the 3rd, Lange transmitted a routine position report to U-boat headquarters. The message was brief and coded. It simply confirmed U-505's location and her intention to begin the return voyage to France. The transmission took seconds. U-505 remained surfaced long enough for the radio operator to send the message, then submerged again to continue the voyage. That transmission was U-505's death warrant. Allied high-frequency direction-finding stations, HUF-DUF in naval terminology, detected the transmission and determined U-505's approximate position. The intelligence was forwarded to all Allied naval forces in the area. One of those forces was Task Group 22.3, commanded by Captain Daniel Vincent Gallery, aboard escort carrier USS Guadalcanal. Gallery received the intelligence report on the afternoon of June 3rd. A U-boat was operating approximately 150 miles west of Cape Blanco. Gallery's task group was low on fuel and heading for Casablanca to refuel. But a U-boat contact was too valuable to ignore. Gallery ordered a course change. Task Group 22.3 would intercept. The task group consisted of 6 ships, USS Guadalcanal, a Casablanca-class escort carrier displacing 10,400 tons, change destroyer escorts, USS Pillsbury, USS Pope, USS Flaherty, USS Chatelain, and USS Jenks, small ships, each displacing 1,400 tons, fast, maneuverable, equipped with sonar and depth charges and hedgehog forward-throwing weapons. These were not the massive fleet carriers and heavy cruisers that dominated headlines. These were workhorses, unglamorous ships crewed by men who hunted submarines week after week in the North Atlantic. By June 1944, Task Group 22.3 had become one of the most successful anti-submarine forces in the Atlantic. In January, the group had sunk U-544. In April, they had destroyed U-515 and U-68 in consecutive days, 3 U-boats in 4 months. That success came from a combination of factors. Improved technology gave them better sensors and weapons. Ultra-intelligence provided targeting information that previous anti-submarine forces never had. Continuous operations gave the crews experience that translated into tactical proficiency. But the most important factor was Daniel Gallery himself. Gallery was born in Chicago on July 10th, 1901, the oldest of 4 brothers who all eventually became rear admirals. He graduated from the Naval Academy in 1920 and spent his early career as a naval aviator. By 1943, he had extensive experience in aviation and had developed strong opinions about how carriers should be operated. Gallery was innovative, aggressive, and willing to challenge conventional thinking. When he took command of USS Guadalcanal in September 1943, he immediately began experimenting with tactics other escort carrier commanders considered too dangerous. Escort carriers were small, slow, and poorly armored. Most commanders operated them conservatively. Gallery did not. He ordered night flight operations when other commanders said it was too risky. He developed procedures for his aircraft to force U-boats to remain submerged continuously, draining their batteries until they had to surface into waiting depth charge attacks. He coordinated his destroyer escorts and aircraft into an integrated hunter-killer team that exploited every advantage technology and intelligence provided. And in April 1944, after his task group forced U-515 to surface, Gallery watched the German crew abandon the submarine before it sank. He watched the empty U-boat circle on the surface for several minutes before finally going down. And he thought, we could have boarded her. The idea seemed insane to his staff officers. U-boats were designed to sink if captured. Demolition charges were installed throughout every submarine. Scuttling valves would flood the boat in minutes. Any boarding party would have perhaps 60 seconds to get aboard, get below, find the charges, disarm them, close the valves, and start pumping out water, all while under possible enemy fire, all while the boat was sinking beneath them, all with no training, no familiarity with German submarine systems, and no idea what booby traps might have been set. The odds of success were virtually zero. Gallery did not care about the odds. He cared about the prize. A captured U-boat would be an intelligence windfall. The Germans used sophisticated codes and ciphers. Breaking those systems required physical access to code books and cipher equipment. A captured boat would provide that access. Torpedo guidance systems could be examined. Sonar equipment could be tested. Communication systems could be analyzed. The tactical advantages would be immense. Gallery began training boarding parties. He designated specific crew members on each ship to form the boarding team. He kept whaleboats ready for immediate launch. He developed procedures for suppressing enemy fire without sinking the submarine. He briefed his destroyer escort captains on the plan. If they could force another U-boat to surface, they would attempt capture. Most of his officers thought Gallery was wasting time on an impossible fantasy. They humored him because he was the task group commander and because his other tactics had proven successful. But nobody really believed they would capture a U-boat until June 4th, 1944. At 11:10, on the morning of June 4th, USS Chatelain's sonar detected U-505 at 800 yards. The contact was solid. Submarine. Submerged. Moving slowly. Commander Dudley Knox on Chatelain ordered general quarters. The destroyer escort increased speed and turned toward the contact. Hedgehog crews prepared their weapons. On Guadalcanal, Gallery launched 2 Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters. The aircraft would spot for the attacking ships and mark the submarine's position. At 11:14, Chatelain fired her first Hedgehog salvo. 24 projectiles arced forward and splashed into the Atlantic ahead of the ship. The pattern covered an ellipse approximately 200 feet by 160 feet. The projectiles sank rapidly. Silence. Miss. No explosions meant no hits. The submarine was still there, still moving. Inside U-505, Harold Lang heard the splashes above. He ordered emergency dive to 200 meters and hard turn to starboard. The submarine's rudder responded sluggishly. The hydraulics were not working properly. Another mechanical problem. But the boat turned and dove deeper. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Chatelain maintained sonar contact and repositioned for a second attack. At 11:17, another Hedgehog salvo fired. This time, the pattern landed directly over U-505's track. Multiple explosions. At least 4 hits. The projectiles detonated against the submarine's pressure hull. Inside U-505, the world became chaos. The explosions cracked pipes in the engine room. Relief valves blew throughout the boat. Electrical systems failed. Seawater sprayed from ruptured lines. The rudder jammed hard to port from the hydraulic damage. The submarine began circling uncontrollably. Lang struggled to assess the damage. Reports came from all compartments. Engine room flooding, steering disabled, auxiliary rudder controls unreachable because the aft compartment was flooding, battery compartments taking water. Lang faced a decision. Stay submerged and hope to control the damage, or surface and abandon ship. If he stayed down, the flooding might overwhelm the pumps. The submarine would sink with all hands. If he surfaced, Allied ships would destroy U-505 with gunfire. Either way, the boat was probably lost. But surfacing gave his crew a chance to survive. At 11:19, Langer gave the order. Blow all tanks. Emergency surface. U-505 rose from 200 meters at a steep angle. She broke the surface 600 yards from Chatelain, rolling heavily, her conning tower emerging first, then her deck. Water cascaded off the hull. The submarine was alive, circling slowly at 5 or 6 knots with her jammed rudder pulling her in a constant turn. On Guadalcanal, Gallery watched through binoculars. A surfaced U-boat. Exactly what he had been planning for. He grabbed the radio. "This is Blue Jay. Do not sink that submarine. Boarding parties away. I repeat, do not sink the submarine." German sailors began emerging from the conning tower hatch. They tried to man the deck gun, but Chatelain opened fire with 20mm and 40mm guns. The small caliber rounds stitched across U-505's deck and superstructure. 1 German sailor was killed instantly. The rest dove overboard. Harold Lang was the last to emerge. He ordered the crew to abandon ship and activate scuttling procedures. Then he jumped into the Atlantic with his men. On USS Pillsbury, Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert David stood in the whaleboat with his 8-man boarding party. The boat crew rowed frantically toward the circling submarine. David was 41 years old, a career enlisted man who had worked his way up to officer rank over 24 years. He knew this was probably suicide. U-505 was circling unpredictably. She could sink at any moment. Demolition charges could explode. Booby traps could be set throughout the boat. German sailors might still be below, armed and desperate. David did not care. Orders were orders. At 11:23, Pillsbury's whaleboat reached U-505. The submarine was still moving. Her deck slippery with seawater and oil. David leapt aboard, followed by his boarding party. They scrambled up the slippery deck to the conning tower. David plunged through the hatch first, expecting bullets or explosions. Nothing. The submarine was empty. The German crew had all abandoned ship. But water was flooding in through the open scuttling valves. The boat was settling by the stern. David had minutes, maybe seconds. His boarding party worked with desperate speed. They found scuttling valves and closed them. They found electrical switches and reconnected power. They found leaks and plugged them with whatever materials they could improvise. Radioman Second Class Stanley WWII and Torpedoman Third Class Arthur Knispel searched frantically for demolition charges, disarming 14 charges they found throughout the boat. The submarine was rising slightly. The flooding had stopped, but U-505 was still in danger. She needed pumps running to clear the water already inside. She needed electrical power restored. She needed a tow line attached before she drifted away or capsized. A larger salvage party from Guadalcanal arrived, led by Commander Earl Trocino, the carrier's chief engineer. Trocino assessed the damage and began organizing salvage operations. His team disconnected the diesel engines from the electric motors, leaving the motors clutched to the propeller shafts. When Guadalcanal took U-505 under tow, the propellers would spin as they moved through the water, turning the shafts and the motors. The motors would act as generators, charging the submarine's batteries. With charged batteries, U-505's own pumps could clear the remaining water. By 1400 hours, U-505 was under tow by Guadalcanal, heading north. The submarine was afloat, damaged, but stable. 58 German sailors had been pulled from the water by Chatelain and Jenks. Only one man had been killed in the brief gunfire exchange. Harold Lang sat, wrapped in a blanket, on Guadalcanal's deck, watching his former command being towed away. He would spend the next 3 years in an American prisoner of war camp, kept in complete isolation, denied access even to the Red Cross. The Germans could not know U-505 had been captured. Gallery radioed his triumph to Atlantic Fleet headquarters and requested permission to make for Casablanca. The response shocked him. Dakar denied. Proceed to Bermuda, 2,500 miles away. We will rendezvous a tanker with fuel. Gallery could not understand the order. Bermuda was five times farther than Casablanca. His task group was critically low on fuel. What Gallery did not know was that the Allied invasion of Normandy was scheduled for June 6th, 48 hours away. What he did not know was that British codebreakers had been reading German Enigma messages since 1940. What he did not know was that his capture of U-505 could compromise the most valuable intelligence operation of the war if the Germans discovered it. Casablanca was full of German spies. Bermuda was secure. The submarine had to disappear completely. On June 19th, after a tow of 1,700 nautical miles, U-505 entered the Great Sound at Bermuda. She remained there under complete secrecy until May 1945. Designated USS Nemo, while Navy intelligence stripped her of every secret. The intelligence haul was extraordinary. 2 Enigma machines with current cipher rotors, 900 pounds of code books, acoustic torpedoes the Allies had never examined, radio equipment, sonar systems, tactical manuals from Admiral Dönitz himself. The Germans never discovered the capture. They assumed U-505 had been sunk by aircraft. They made routine changes to their codes, but nothing major. Allied codebreakers continued reading German naval messages through the end of the European War. Albert David received the Medal of Honor for leading the boarding party. He died of a heart attack on September the 17th, 1945, 3 weeks before the medal could be presented. His widow received it from President Truman on October the 5th. Gallery received the Legion of Merit. The entire task group received the Presidential Unit Citation. It was the first enemy warship captured by American forces on the high seas since 1815. U-505 survived the war. She was displayed at various locations until 1954, at Pickels, when she was donated to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, Gallery's hometown. She was transported up the St. Lawrence Seaway and through the Great Lakes. On September 25, 1954, she was dedicated as a permanent memorial. She remains there today, one of only 4 German World War II U-boats preserved as museum ships, and one of only 2 Type I C boats still in existence. Visitors can walk through her cramped interior and understand what U-boat crews endured. The capture proved that preparation and audacity could achieve the impossible. Gallery had trained his crews for a scenario everyone considered fantasy. When the moment came, those crews executed perfectly under impossible circumstances. David and his boarding party risked their lives entering a sinking submarine that could have exploded at any second. They succeeded because training replaced panic, because courage overcame fear, because men chose action over safety. The lesson remains relevant 80 years later. Innovation succeeds when leaders prepare for opportunities others dismiss as impossible. Victory belongs to those willing to attempt what conventional wisdom says cannot be done. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.